Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Inside Florida Politics Podcast, powered by the USA Today Florida Network. As we tape the show on October 9th, the federal government is still partially shut down, and the reason is a dispute over funding healthcare that has significant ramifications for Florida. Speaking of health, there remains a lot of confusion over vaccine policy, and Florida, you guessed it, is at the center of a lot of that skepticism. And finally, President Trump will make his winter season return to Florida as early as November 5th. But will he check out the proposed site for a someday presidential library down in downtown Miami? I'm Antonio Fins, your host, and these are topics I'll be discussing with my colleague, John Kennedy of the USA Today Florida Network. John, so as we speak this morning, the government shutdown is still in effect, and at the center of the standoff is healthcare. Florida has always been kind of an enigma in this whole fight over Obamacare. We traditionally have led the country in signing up for Obamacare health coverage, but at the same time, we vote for political figures who promise to get rid of Obamacare. And now, as you've written, Republicans and GOP allied groups are divided over allowing these Obamacare tax credits to expire. 8 years after the U.S. Senator John McCain of Arizona gave that famous thumbs down in that one vote in the Senate to get rid of Obamacare, it seems that the 15-year-old program is still vexing the grand old party. What did you find?
Yeah, this standoff in the halls of Congress has a real impact here in Florida in that, what we're talking about is there are 24 million people across the U.S. that get their private health insurance through Obamacare, the insurance marketplace that helps people who don't get coverage through work or through a spouse's coverage. And most of these people get help with the cost of coverage through tax credits. And Florida has the most people in the nation on Obamacare, 4.7 million Floridians. And it's estimated that about half of them, about 2.2 million people, will either lose or be priced out of coverage if these tax credits disappear, as they are scheduled to do on December 31st. Democrats now see this as the time for the fight. Republicans, of course, are saying, yeah, Obamacare is important. We just don't want to talk about it now. Let's just restart the federal government, even if that's only for another month or so. And then we can revisit the Obamacare fight maybe later in November. That seems to be part of the dialogue when it comes to how to end this shutdown or talk of trying to end it. But Democrats have heard some of these Republican promises before, and guess what? They don't believe them. Now the Obamacare fight gets further interesting because of divided loyalties. Here in Florida, a leading business group, Associated Industries of Florida, they're urging Congress to keep the tax credits alive past the end of the year, saying that businesses benefit from having the federal government help people find insurance. And a lot of Florida businesses don't offer health benefits, especially smaller companies. So these tax credits are important, and Associated Industries fears that a real economic problem in the state will occur if suddenly 2.2 million people lose health insurance, as is projected with the end of Obamacare tax credits. Hospitals and other health industry groups also are weighing in because they see, those costs with millions of uninsured people potentially showing up in their emergency rooms needing care that these facilities have to provide. They're wondering who's going to pay. It's probably going to be the health companies. But while some Florida businesses are clamoring to continue the tax credits, in D.C., some big conservative lobbies like Americans for Tax Reform, the Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, they're all demanding that the GOP lets the tax credits expire. They call these credits part of the, quote, radical left's agenda. So, as we speak, there's been little movement in Congress. The shutdown goes on and the tax credits are headed toward history right now. But there's so many different twists and turns to the story because you also have 10 Republicans in Congress acknowledging that these tax credits are very popular with voters from both parties. And even Obamacare, after being vilified for so long by people like President Trump, Florida's U.S. Senator Rick Scott, and plenty more, that Obamacare is kind of generally part of the fabric of American healthcare right now. So these 10 members of Congress are trying to get legislation. They've sponsored legislation, and they live in potentially swing districts. So they know that this end of Obamacare tax credits could have some blowback in the next elections. They want to extend them at least for another year. One of them is Congressman Carlos Jimenez of Miami, who's from a very working class district, and that relies very heavily on Obamacare. He sees the potential political impact of these tax credits disappearing. So, Trump has largely stayed out of the tax credit fight, other than, he's obviously on the side of the Republicans that are kind of saying just reopen government right now, talk about tax credits later. But maybe it's time for Trump, who's been trying to kill Obamacare unsuccessfully for many years. Maybe he should finally shrug and just let go of this vilifying of Obamacare and realize that, America has moved on, and maybe he should too.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because the whole issue in Florida, one of the reasons we have this dichotomy, this duality, the way that we look at Obamacare. I mean, you go to a place like Hialeah, which is, I think, one of the first cities in Florida to name a major thoroughfare after President Trump. At the same time, and there's very, very MAGA city. At the same time, they are one of the highest Obamacare signups. So there's always been this duality, and part of the reason is that Florida is not a Fortune 500 state. It's really, our economy and our employment market is really driven by small and medium-sized businesses. And those are generally the type of people that need the kind of the coverage, health insurance coverage that Obamacare provides. At the same time, it's also the same type of people who find the requirement, the mandate to have health insurance as government imposition, as big government, socialism, and so forth. So it does lend itself to this duality that we have seen so many times. And part of the reason this is going to be really important going forward is that you also, at least public health officials, also worry about the way that we have this real divide now over vaccinations and preventive care. And, the fact that even vaccines that have been a standard of American public health policy for decades, a century, are now being undermined by a lot of skepticism that public health officials say is completely unfounded. And, just this week, we've had the decision to break down the vaccine that deals with, I think, the rubella, the MMR. I lost the acronym here, but into 4 different vaccines, and public health officials saying, well, yeah, but if you're concerned about vaccinations, why do 4 when you can just do 1 and get it? And, and are parents really going to start subjecting their kids to 4 different vaccines? So all these concerns now put even more emphasis on having health insurance coverage when you start taking things like fluoride out of the water, so you may have more dental issues. When you start undermining vaccines, and you still, the rate of illness may increase, not next week, but certainly over time, the ability to have health insurance is going to become even more important going down the line. And I think that's raising the stakes on this one partial government shutdown.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are all things that, these kind of obstacles are just enough in a state like Florida to have people just stop getting health care, or attempting to stop getting health care until they really need it. And similarly, as you point out with vaccines, we're going to have a population that is, maybe not largely unvaccinated, but significant portions of the population are not, including school kids. So is that the next crisis to occur?
All right. Well, let's spoke about President Trump. Well, Governor Ron DeSantis and Miami-Dade College have agreed to offer up a 2.63-acre parcel in downtown Miami for a future Donald J. Trump presidential library in down here in downtown Miami. It's interesting, John. You've written a lot about it, and we've talked about it on this podcast a number of times. This on again, off again, on again, off again bromance between the president and the governor. Offering up a parcel of land worth up to 70, 80, some people say even more than that, millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, high 5 figures, or actually 8 figures, basically is quite an offer to bring the bromance back. I mean, like I think the last episode of the podcast, we were talking about this brewing rivalry between DeSantis and Trump headed into the 2026 midterm elections. Now you have this offer of really a choice piece of land. Tell us, are we back on again?
Yeah, I know. It seems to be that DeSantis is trying everything that he can do to at least create the appearance that he and Trump are tight. And, I think that's something that DeSantis sees his own political stock going forward as being, it's important for him to have that kind of veneer that the president likes him, supports him, and that DeSantis has done everything he could to advance the president's agenda, whether it be political or, in this kind of case, a social like suck up to the president by saying, here's where your future, library, possibly with the emphasis on LIE, library, is going to be. But we also had a development this week where Trump endorsed Attorney General James Uthmeier, who is an appointee of Governor Ron DeSantis, his former chief of staff, his running mate on a lot of issues when it came to the controversy surrounding Hope, Florida, and also a lot of his election efforts. So Uthmeier and DeSantis go way back, and now suddenly Trump is endorsing Uthmeier for Attorney General next year when he runs for the first time as a candidate. It was only about a month ago that that Trump was talking about House Speaker Danny Perez from Miami as being he should run for Attorney General. So it's still a little bit of a neck snapping moment here where he went from sounding like he was going to endorse a rival of DeSantis in Perez to now suddenly endorsing an ally of DeSantis, Uthmeier. So there's a lot of inside the West Wing kind of workings going on here. And of course, Susie Wiles, the chief of staff of the governor, goes way back with both DeSantis and Trump, not good with DeSantis. And that's also been seen as fueling this rivalry between the president and the governor. But, suddenly there seems to be a moment of accord here. So we'll see how long this lasts. But the presidential library is a good step on the governor's part to get in the president's good graces, it would seem.
Well, it would seem, but so far we've not heard from the White House or the president about whether he agrees with this spot. Although I have to say, people who listen to the podcast know that I've referenced that I spend time in Miami. I identify as a Miamian, and that does make a lot of sense for both Miami-Dade College, although there is controversy within the college's community about that location. It does make sense, downtown Miami, in that area, you already have the Freedom Tower Museum. You've also got the Art Museum, the Science Museum. It really has become kind of like this museum center down there. So putting a presidential library there would be a coup for downtown Miami, and also for Miami-Dade College, as really raise its profile nationally. At the same time, though, you got it's interesting. I did a comparison, and the 2.63 acre site would be the smallest of any presidential library out there, at least among the modern presidents. The smallest is about 6 acres, and that's Gerald Ford's. But Ford's is actually divided between the museum that is in Grand Rapids and then also the presidential archives, which commonly referred to as the library, which is at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Now, Trump could do the same thing there. There's also talk that, Trump could do some sort of major high rise at the site, which is in keeping with his entire history as a developer. You could have, even I think there's been some talk, and one of the networks reported that it could be sort of this mixed use development where you have the library at the bottom of the building and then a hotel rising up, although putting that right next to the venerated and iconic and almost sacred landmark Freedom Tower towering it over. I don't know how that would play out, but nonetheless, like I said, we haven't heard the end of this, but we should say that President Trump is scheduled to be in Miami November 5th. He's going to speak at the American Business Forum that is in downtown, and actually at the Kaseya Center, where the home of the Miami Heat, which is almost just across the street from what this location would be. So a real indication here would be, should the president go while he's then downtown, go to the site and take a look at it? As a developer, you've got to figure that he'd be interested in just looking at the property. So there's a lot more to come to this story than this, but that's it for now for this week's episode. I want to thank our production guru, Rob Landers, as well as all the reporters and editors of the USA Today Florida Network, whose work we depend on to get this podcast inform us. And until then, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.